Combat box. The evolution of 8th Air Force formations. 1942 experiments. The first 10 missions of the 8th Air Force from England in August 1942 were shallow penetrations of France, strongly supported by Royal Air Force Spitfire fighter escorts. B-17 Flying Fortresses flew in 6-plane squadrons with 2 to 4 miles between squadrons to avoid mid-air collisions between the inexperienced crews. Although unable to support each other, the 6-plane squadrons had the virtues of simplicity and ease of control. The bombers within a squadron were stacked at 3 altitudes with approximately 150 FD-46M between the highest and lowest, and except for the lead pair, were not in mutually supporting elements. As missions grew larger in size, deeper in penetration, and faced increasingly effective defenders, the AAF recognized that more compact formations were needed and returned to the 3 aircraft V formation that had been standard before the war. Squadrons consisted of 3 such Vs, all flying at the same altitude, with 2 such squadrons in a group formation, the second higher, trailing, and staggered to the right. The entire formation was 600 FT-180M high, 500 FT-150M deep, and nearly 2,500 FT-760M across. It proved cumbersome to maneuver, as did a 36-plane alternative, and left many bomber gunners with restricted fields of fire. The original 2 heavy bomb groups of the 8th Air Force transferred to North Africa and were replaced in October and November by 4 new groups of B-17s, the 306th 91st, 303rd, and 305th groups, and 2 of B-24 Liberators, 44th and 93rd BG, each of which experimented. Their early missions included numerous mechanical turnbacks, aborts which hampered development of effective schemes. Between November 1942 and the end of the war, various configurations of the combat box were adopted to meet changing conditions, particularly changed German tactics that stressed head-on attacks against the weak forward firepower of the bombers. The 305th BG innovated the 18 aircraft Javelin Down formation, which stacked planes within an element and squadrons within a group downwards in the direction of the sun. This aided gunners on the higher aircraft in seeing lower aircraft without being blinded by glare. In the front elevation, the formation resembled a set of stairs, but in profile and plan resembled a spear point. Unlike earlier group formations in which the lead bomber had flown in the lowest position, it now was placed in the center of the formation vertically. The 305th successfully tested the formation on a December 6, 1942, mission to Lille, and it was immediately adopted by the other 3 B-17 groups. The 305th soon developed a more compact staggered formation that stacked elements downward in one direction, but stacked squadrons upward in the opposite direction. A third element of 3 bombers was added to the 18-plane box, placed in the most exposed squadron for additional support. This resulted in a 21-plane wedge-shaped configuration that was adopted by all groups on January 13, 1943, and remained standard through September 1943. In 1943, the use of assembly ships, modified older bombers with unique paint schemes to organize combat boxes, was devised. These planes continued to be used throughout the war, even with the invention of other technological advances. Wing boxes. Although the combat box was initially designed around a group of airplanes, it was expanded to include a formation of 3 groups flying together as a combat wing, all of which were based on the same triangular design of a leading bomber or grouping of bombers in the center, and 2 bombers or groupings immediately behind in a V shape, with one at an altitude above and one. The new combat boxes continued to be used, but groups were placed in a horizontal column and stacked at increasing altitude to decrease their vulnerability to attack. This resulted in the rear formations lagging behind, which impacted both defensive tactics and bombing performance. The wing box, a 54-plane formation, basically 3 18-plane boxes stacked in a similar fashion, to the group box evolved from a need to provide defensive fire against head-on attacks. The formations were stacked so that while squadrons were stacked away from the sun on missions, groups were stacked in the opposite direction, making for a more compact wing box. Because the 8th AF had only 4 B-17 units until May 1943, composite groups were formed by combining squadrons from different groups, or a fourth group was added to the wing box to form a diamond-shaped box. The latter was flown in a trailing position behind the wing and proved susceptible to Luftwaffe tactics of attacking the extremities of formations. The wing box was often spread 3,000 ft 910 m vertically, 7,000 ft 2100 m deep, and 2,000 ft 610 m across, and was difficult to maintain. The most serious disadvantage of the wing box was that the lowermost and uppermost elements, trailing at the end of the formation, had the least mutual protection. An additional risk was that of an aircraft being struck by falling bombs if it strayed in the box. See image. Directly below us on 19 May 1944, to Berlin in B-17 G42-102,411 in the path of our falling bombs was a B-17 out of position. Later pictures show a B-17 having his left stabilizer shorn off by a 500-pound bomb dropped from above. That plane moved. In the summer of 1943, the 8th expanded in size to 16 groups of B-17s and 4 of B-24s, and by the following June would grow to 39 groups. The table of organization and equipment for heavy bombardment groups was increased from 35 to 62 planes, with a huge influx of new bombers beginning in the autumn of 1943, and the use of composite groups was discontinued, as many groups flew 2 group boxes on a single mission. The 54-plane wing combat box used by the 8th's B-17s required both practice and discipline to maintain formation. Turbulence from leading bombers added to the difficulty of maintaining formation. The 54-plane box is capable of fielding upwards of 700 heavy-caliber defensive machine guns in total to serve as a formidable defense against fighters. However, as flak became the greater threat in May 1944, the 36-plane box was resurrected in a much looser formation and became the standard through the remainder of the war, except on days when significant fighter opposition was anticipated. Group combat box revisions. In October 1943, the first radar-guided Pathfinder group began operations, bringing about a need for a compact 36-plane group formation to optimize bombing performance in adverse weather conditions. This was done initially by doubling the number of 3-plane elements in a squadron formation from 2 to 4, and placing all 3 planes within an element at the same altitude to avoid collisions. LeMay, who had been promoted to command of the 3rd Bomb Division, devised this diamond-shaped 12-plane combat box and preferred it over others, so that in August 1944, when he took command of Operation Matterhorn in India, he adopted it as the basic formation for B-29 superfortresses. A variation of the formation using 4 9-plane squadrons in a diamond formation was developed to compress the bombing pattern further. Wing boxes followed each other in trail, and the formation was easier for escorts to protect. However, the close stagger of the 4-squadron 36-plane was difficult to maintain and increased the likelihood of a bomber flying at the bottom of the box being struck by bombs dropped from a higher plane. In visual bombing situations, the revised 36-plane box eliminated the lowest squadron to lessen the possibility. Although the 36 and 27 bomber group combat box became standard for most of 1944, a diamond-shaped formation of 4 10-plane squadrons was developed for B-24s of both the 8th and 15th Air Force. During the winter of 1944-45, minimizing losses to flak became a priority. The 27-plane box became standard for B-17s for all of 1945, spread more laterally to avoid catastrophic damage to the formation from a single shell burst. At the same time, wingmen flew more forward on element leaders creating a box that was stacked 750 ft 230 m vertically, 650 ft 200 m from front to back, and 1170 ft 360 m laterally. This final variation presented flak gunners with a small target, produced excellent bomb patterns, and was both easy to fly and control. B-24 combat boxes. B-24s of the 2nd Air Division, more difficult than B-17s to fly in formation at high altitudes and with more restricted cockpit visibility, used a variation of the 27-plane group box. One element of each squadron, normally the uppermost in the middle/lead and high/right squadrons and lowermost in the low/left squadron, was moved to the outside of the formation so that it was abreast of the trailing element. This produced a line formation that was 2440 ft 740 m wide and 700 ft 210 m vertically, but only 320 ft 98 m deep, reducing the time over target significantly. The 96th Combat Bomb Wing further refined the formation during its bomb runs by shifting the lead squadron into the highest position, the second squadron overlapping it in trail and 150 ft 46 m lower, and the third squadron in file behind the second. This produced devastatingly accurate bombing results in the last months of the war. 15th Air Force formations. The 15th Air Force, consisting of a preponderance of B-24 groups flying at altitudes 5,000 feet 1,500 m or lower, called the six-box formation. It consisted of 40 aircraft, with the group divided into 2 units of 20 B-24s, one behind the other, and each unit consisted of 3 squadron boxes. The center squadron, known as Able Box of the first unit, was a composite formation of 6 aircraft containing the group leader, with the deputy leader flying on its wing. The other 4 aircraft of Able Box were from the 2 squadrons assigned to the unit for that mission, with the 6 bombers formed in 2V formations and trail and stepped lower in altitude. On each side of the lead squadron were 7 bomber boxes called Baker Box to the right and Charlie Box to the left, each box made up of bombers of 1 squadron, also in Vs of 3, with 1 additional bomber flying in the slot of the center rear 6th position of each squadron box, and known as Tail and Charlie. This 7th position was usually flown by the least experienced crew in the squadron and was vulnerable to fighter attack. The second unit of the group formation was configured identically, except that its boxes were named Dog, Easy, and Fox. Each position within a box was numbered, so that the group leader flew the Able 1 position while the Tail and Charlie of the leftmost rear squadron flew Fox 7. The second unit flew at an altitude approximately 500 ft 150 m lower than the first unit. Because it was laterally wide, the 6-box formation was not a compact formation, was cumbersome to fly, and thus was less efficient in bombing accuracy. The 15th Air Force adopted the diamond formation during the summer of 1944 to increase its bombing accuracy, but this also had the negative consequences of increasing losses to flak. This formation reduced the number of boxes from 6 to 4, each flying 3 elements of 3 planes, each with a Tail and Charlie. As with the 6-box formation, the trailing elements were stacked downward from the high leader, and the Tail and Charlie of the 4th box, Dog 10, was still often referred to as the Purple Heart position. The 4-box formation proved easier to assemble and organize, provided a tight bomb pattern, and concentrated defensive firepower against fighter attacks.